rightly described as kryptonite for the Republican Party, the court's assault on reproductive rights. And now a new issue in this fight has opened up, leaving politicians without a clear answer on the topic. Following the Alabama Supreme Court's ruling that frozen embryos created through in vitro fertilization are considered children, doctors and patients are fearful and uncertain and outraged. Watch Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville struggle to answer a question from NBC News this afternoon about what is happening in his own state.
Do you have a reaction to the Alabama Supreme Court ruling on the fact that embryos are children?
Yeah, I was all for it. We need to have more kids. We need to have an opportunity to do that. And I thought this was the right thing to do. But
IVF is used to have more children, and right now IVF services are paused at some of the clinics in Alabama. Aren't you concerned that this could impact people who are trying to have kids?
Well, that's for another conversation. People need to have. We need more kids. We need the people to have the opportunity to have kids.
Senator, what do you say to the women right now in Alabama who no longer have access to IVF, or who will not, as a result of this ruling? What do you say to them?
Well, that's a hard one. It really is. It's really hard. Because, again, you want people to have that opportunity. And that's what I was telling her. We need more kids.
Joining me now, President and CEO of Reproductive Freedom for All, Minnie Timmaraju. Molly Jong is back with us. Minnie, I mean, my goodness. I don't know if that is a question about not knowing the many ways that people now are able to conceive, or if he just has not followed this story. Either way, your reaction to Senator Tuberville, unaware of not just the consequences, but what this ruling is even about.
I have so many reactions. I'll try to distill them. I think they know full well what they're doing. They have been embedded with the extremist right-wing evangelical community. Tommy Tuberville is part of that community. They know full well what they're doing. They've just been caught. Mm-hmm. I mean, even Kellyanne Conway, the Washington Post reported, circulated a memo with polling that showed 86% of Americans support IVF. They went ahead. They just never thought they'd get caught. Mm-hmm. This is so connected to exactly the same scenario with Dobbs, where they're beginning to hide and pretend to moderate their position on abortion because they know it's wildly unpopular. Look, I mean, this has always been the end game of this movement. Mm-hmm. It is here and now, and they don't know how to handle it now that it's been exposed.
Minnie, you recall when advocates like yourself warned of the overthrow of Roe. You recall that when that actually did happen, that you warned that something like this Alabama ruling would happen. And both times there were people who said, you're hysterical, you're overreacting, none of that's going to happen. Well, here we are. Talk about why this Alabama ruling is just so devastating, not just for folks in Alabama, but for folks all across this country.
It's devastating because it's not limited to Alabama.
Yep.
Okay. This is a core foundational belief of the entire GOP. There is a Life Begins at Conception bill that was co-sponsored by over 120 Republicans, including Speaker Mike Johnson. This thing is in Congress. Okay. Nikki Haley is now on the record talking about how she believes embryos are babies. This is so embedded. The Project 2025 blueprint that the extremist right-wing GOP leadership are putting forth to be prepared for a Trump administration that you've been covering. Mm-hmm. Part of that agenda as well. This was a footnote in Dobbs. It's all been out there in plain sight. As you noted, like, we had a believability gap around Roe falling. We've had a believability gap around attacks on contraception and IVF. It's important for folks to remember this isn't limited to a bunch of extremists in places like Texas and Alabama. It's right here in the leadership of the GOP in Congress and at the federal level and in the presidential race.
And so it is, in part, Molly, while you've had this believability gap, there's also been this question about saliency. Will this motivate voters in the same way going into November 2024 that it motivated voters going into the midterms? I think it is, in part, why you have Vice President Harris, why you have someone like Governor Gretchen Whitmer really speaking to this topic just today. Take a listen.
So on the one hand, the proponents are saying that an individual doesn't have a right to end an unwanted pregnancy. And on the other hand, the individual does not have a right to start a family.
They've shown us their next steps, a national abortion ban. put healthcare providers behind bars, ban emergency contraception, ban birth control, ban IVF, as we just saw in Alabama this week, banning mifepristone. This is their playbook.
This is one where we don't even need to work that hard to create a contrast.
Yeah, it's also really scary. I mean, I was born in 1978, 5 years after Roe v. Wade was the law of the land. I did not think that I would be 45 and arguing that contraception should be legal. I mean, this has gotten very crazy. I would say, I don't think women want to live in a country where an embryo has more rights than she does. And that's what we're talking about here, right? Because these embryos are people, but if you are having, a ectopic pregnancy, your life, you are sent, a lot of times we're seeing these women sent to wait until they're at death's door to get an abortion, or, so it is clear that these embryos have more rights than these women.
Or you have doctors, Minnie, on the phone with attorneys who represent their facilities or their hospitals trying to figure out where the law is when they should be focused on making life affirming decisions. I think about what Molly just said. This personhood fight has been that has been the backdrop to all of this, right? And I don't know exactly, want to hear your thoughts on this, how you message around the forthcoming dangers of what it is they want to do vis-a-vis personhood.
Yeah, I think we have to be really, really plain. We have to speak in very plain, clear language to the American people. These folks, from Donald Trump to Mike Johnson, Mitch McConnell, the whole crew, they're all to blame for the crisis. They're responsible. The GOP is responsible for the overturning of Roe v. Wade. It's GOP bad actors in all of these state houses and all of these Supreme Courts that are doing these incredibly nefarious, challenging abortion bans and additional, rulings like we saw with Matthew Kacsmaryk and Texas with mifepristone, the Alabama Supreme Court. The list goes on and on. We have to very clearly, as you said, drive the contrast, but define the villains here. And they're making it easier for us, but we also have to raise the alarm. There's something folks can do right now, this cycle, and it's elect Joe Biden and Democrats up and down the ticket to put a stop at this. We do it by pinning this squarely on them, making sure folks understand who is responsible.
President Biden, who you just referenced, said this today about the Alabama ruling, quote, "The disregard for women's ability to make these decisions for themselves and their families is outrageous and unacceptable. We're fighting for the freedom of women, for families, and for doctors who care for these women, and we won't stop until we restore the protections of Roe v. Wade in federal law for all women in every step." What is next, Minnie, in that fight?
Yeah, we have to not only reelect the president and vice president, we have to flip the House, which is why I keep talking about Mike Johnson and how not only complicit, but his leadership in all of this. But we also have to hold the Senate. That's going to be really, really tough, but there's a clear pathway. And this issue clears a very clean distinction between our parties. Everyone understands this issue and how it's encroaching on their day-to-day decisions on if, when, and how to have a family. So we have a clear pathway, but it will be very tough. We got to deliver a federal trifecta for Joe Biden to codify Roe.